President Trump's declaration of a national emergency to cover a border wall, in some people's view, is not worthy of that title. Dr. Martin Luther King's Poor People campaign is being revived by community leaders Reverend William Barber and Reverend Liz Theo-Harris of the Cairo Center to educate the public on critical issues that should be labeled as emergencies and what we plan to do to solve the problem long term. The updated idea for the tour began after Barber led civil rights movements in his home city of North Carolina back in 2013. Protests and marches were organized to bring awareness about people's rights to vote, union support, and LGBTQ acceptance. Reverend Barber is adamant on fixing the issues inside the border and inside our own country first, before we focus on keeping illegals out. We have Jasmine Colquitt up next with the details. Jasmine?
Poor People's Campaign is experiencing a rival right here in our own local communities. Outrage over Donald Trump's support of a border wall instead of focusing on the issues impacting our communities right here in our local cities has caused Dr. King's campaign to experience a revival.
So, Jasmine, do you believe the focus should begin on the Poor People's Campaign? And how do you think that it might have changed from Dr. King's original vision?
Well, the focus on what they call interlocking injustice, which includes racism, poverty, and ecological damage, is a good start. But in today's climate and environment, what we need to focus on is the wealth disparity. One could even argue that in today's climate, where the wealth gap is bigger than it's ever been before, than we've seen it in our history,
right,
that the race for resources is even more important than the race for racial equality, or equally as important.
So the actual tours will begin in March and head into April in over 20 states. How can more cities and states in the U.S. incorporate this undertaking? And do you think the remaining states will jump on board, or do you think they'll have reservations about this?
Well, as long as they continue with this grassroots momentum as far as keeping your local communities involved, then I believe that more cities and more states will definitely be more game to jump onto this campaign, as long as they continue to empower our local communities and keep our local people involved first and foremost. Good
point. So it has been discussed that healthcare and clean energy jobs could be created with more than the $6 billion requested to create Trump's border wall. What other meaningful occupations and industries do you think the Poor People's Campaign can bring forth?
Well, I definitely believe that there should be a huge emphasis on education, not only education for our younger children, but also on continuing education for adults in our communities that are feeling disenfranchised by the lack of resources that are being poured into the issues that are affecting our local communities. So definitely an emphasis on continuing education and strengthening our schools and our educations and pouring those resources into our teachers is definitely an issue that the Poor People Campaign wants to keep on the table.
How do you think education is being affected in these low-income areas by this? I mean, do you think that this could bring some more attention to some seriously much-needed change?
I definitely believe it could bring some issue and shed some light on some change that we would need. Some policies that, previous presidents had enacted, and the way that state funding is set up, it often leaves our schools and our poor communities most at risk. So if we continue to shed light and pour the resources into our schools and our local communities, as well as strengthening programs for continuing educations for our adults, I definitely believe that this is the way that we can empower our local citizens to empower their own community, which is ultimately something that I believe Dr. King would want to see realized with the Poor People Campaign.
Absolutely. And of course, diversity was another huge focus for Dr. King, with the fact that, Reverend Barber has been trying to get with other community leaders, not all of them black, not all of them white, but a nice diverse group to be able to bring Dr. King's vision back to life, to be able to focus on that. So one thing also about, we were talking about education. I think that charter schools would have a lot to do with this. We talked about this a while back with another interview that, we're dealing with education with the charter schools coming into the low-income communities. Do you think that the charter schools potentially would take away from this type of campaign?
Well, it's been a lot of controversy surrounding our charter schools, and something I would definitely want to look into is the accessibility of our charter schools. I know that they've been pouring them into our more at-risk communities and things like that, and they definitely have possibly some good points, but I believe a lot of these issues definitely boil down to the accessibility. Is it
All right.
accessible for our most vulnerable populations?
Right.
And if
Well,
it's found that there is accessibility, and I think it's something that we should definitely explore.
I'm looking forward to learning more about that. Jasmine Colquitt, thank you. Don't go too far. More Onyx News will be right back after these messages.